Thank you, first of all, for inviting me here, and thank you for organizing it in such a beautiful venue. Now, the topic I'm talking about is normally not linked to beautiful venues, but I was rather thinking today whether there's a reason to have a discussion about resolution on Mardi Gras. I don't think so, but you never know. So with that, let me just start. The Single Resolution Board devoted last year its annual conference to the topic Building Resolvability Together. It's an important topic, and I think in the context of today's conference, in the context of the somewhat gloomy picture you draw on these questions, I think the short answer is clear. Building resolvability together means firmly addressing obstacles we are still facing, and to do it together. All of us have their role, and acknowledging that convergence and international cooperations are key and are unreversible. Tackling the issue of resolution of a systemically important financial institution requires the commitment of all of us that we are presented here. Resolution authorities, supervisors, central banks, finance ministries or regulators, standard setters, and first and foremost, the financial firms. There is a solid foundation to work from to address this issue, and these are tasks that we need to tackle really together. One of the guiding principles from the outset, both in the EU, but probably at the outset even more globally, has been to provide an appropriate degree of convergence and avoid regulatory arbitrage. It's a nicer way of saying first mover advantage or ring fencing. We really need to make sure that we consider that working together makes the solution better for everyone. This was part of the G20 thinking in 29 to end too big to fail by making all banks, no matter their footprint, resolvable, and it, I think, remains the only possible way. And let's be reminded, the FSB really paved the way in this with its key attributes, and subsequent the standards that have been endorsed with a blueprint for the European resolution framework being the BRRD, and the single resolution mechanism regulation for the banking union. And I won't bore you now with the design of the banking union, but try to jump right into the topics. The SRB, as the central resolution authority in the banking union, is responsible first and foremost for achieving resolvability of banks within the banking union. I'm always telling our teams, we are not sitting there waiting to orchestrate beautiful funerals. We are sitting there and we are working forward-looking to make sure that with good resolution plans, which are tied with the recovery plans, banks are resolvable, and my firm belief is this will allow private solutions and avoid, hopefully, the one or the other resolution. But we also need to be aware that there is not a one-size-fits-all. Banks have different structures, different business models, and require a tailored approach. And of course, important always for Europe, proportionality has to be respected. At the beginning of a new year, we all have our glorious New Year's resolutions. I've decided, at least for the SRB, to talk about our New Year's resolutions is probably irritating more than helpful. So what we call it, it's our 2018 work priorities. And I will here focus mainly on those that are related to our resolution work, but those that need something to read if you can't fall asleep. We have our work program published in early December, and I can recommend you to read it. I would hope that someone else is reading it too. So with that, one of the key objectives in 2018 is clearly to adopt resolution plans for the majority of the banking groups under the SRB's remit. Sufficient MREL is the key feature to make banks resolvable, and it's a key component of our resolution plans. This year, the SRB, so 2018, aims to achieve binding MREL targets at consolidated level for all relevant banking groups, but we also will kick off work on MREL targets at material entity level. And that's not fragmentation, that's just reality. You have a group target and you have material entities within a group. Another priority, which is very central to our work, is identifying substantive impediments to resolution. Obstacles to resolution are, and I think I'm not telling you any surprising things here, the lack of available data and adequate management information systems. We are collecting liability data from banks once per year, and the usual comment is, you're only giving us 8 weeks' time, that's too short. In a resolution, 8 weeks is a no-go. We are talking about less than 8 hours. So management system, data availability is definitely an issue. Unduly complex legal structures are something to clean up, to tidy up, and lack of safeguards for continuity of access to financial market infrastructures, and I could go on. To underpin our resolution planning, we will develop internal guidance, and we will try to be as transparent and have as many interaction with the banks as possible so that everyone understands the direction of this work. To go back one step, in 2017, the SRB, for the first time, actually we're still doing it, set out a policy that, unlike in 16, is really ending in binding MREL targets for the largest, the most complex banking groups. And we have fine-tuned this policy for the first time, really to consider some bank-specific adjustments, to have more detailed requirements about the eligibility of certain liabilities and the like. One topic we've carefully looked at is liabilities governed by third country law. Here, unless a bank demonstrates that the bail-in of those liabilities would be recognized by that third country, we would not consider them MREL eligible. We might otherwise believe that we have capital that, in case of need, you just can't bail in. The second area we looked in is basically the BRRD allows to consider non-covered, non-preferred deposits for as MREL eligible subject. They have a minimum duration of 1 year. Now, we have been looking carefully at all those that have a duration of 1 year, whether they can be withdrawn in between. In that case, again, it might be a phantom and not real capital. So we are going into more detail there. And we have started to, and we will focus on that in 18, on the obstacles to resolution. Now, let me just make one statement I'm always making when I see a number of bankers in a room. Though all these obstacles, not all of them are to be addressed by banks, but most are, I think banks don't have to wait for the SRB's decision on impediments to resolvability, but should work on data availability, cleaning up their structure, access to FMIs, resilience of their infrastructure, governance in case of crisis, and all these topics right away. Like on MREL, though the final goal or the final destination of the train might not be 100% clear yet, the direction of travel is clear, and there is no reason to wait until we issue formal decisions. The sooner banks start to commence the journey, the better. I would stop here with the more detailed work on those two topics, but let me just add some broader topics for future consideration. Clearly, I think we have to say that the legal framework that is in place since 2015 is a good one, and it stand a bit the test last year with our first resolution case. Unlike one EU parliamentarian who said it will never work, it even worked on a Tuesday night, which we had never planned for. So But to look at this, you can even make a good system even better, and there are quite a number of topics that still need to be addressed. The European co-legislators are currently preparing the integration of the FSB's TLAC standard for global systemically relevant banks into the BRRD, and with that, again, promoting, I would say, global convergence. But here the challenge is to avoid any cliff effects with other European significant banks. Let's be realistic. Some of the non-GSIBs are systemically more important than GSIBs in Europe, and we need to make sure that we end with a level playing field. Another word is the ongoing discussion about the common backstop to the Single Resolution Fund, so the fund that is built up by the industry, managed by us. Here, the debate is ongoing. I think the importance of this backstop is well understood, so I'm mildly positive. But we also need to consider that the entire framework that was built was very much focusing on how to restore capital position of a bank. So what was left out a bit in thinking was, and what about liquidity? And I think here we need to be sure the toolbox is really geared towards restoring the bank's capital position, but we also need to acknowledge that if you are in a resolution weekend, bail-in does not restore the liquidity position, and it might take time for the market to regain confidence, and it might take more than 24 hours, and to then really build provide the needed funding. So, and at the same time, a solvent liquid buyer might not always be just around the corner. So more work is needed on funding, meaning liquidity in resolution. And here, and that's the link to our fund, it's absolutely clear that the fund can, with and without backstop, play a role, but only a small role in this game. The fund will always be insufficient to be the sole answer on liquidity needs when you think about a globally systemic institution, and you will not be surprised that there is ongoing work and discussion between the European Commission, the European Central Bank, and the SRB. And being responsible for the SRB, I clearly see a very significant role for central banks here in providing liquidity until the market regains confidence. Another topic always to be kept in mind is insolvency procedures. Europe is not the United States. Europe is an agglomeration and a combination of member states, and life is colorful. So we have national insolvency regimes and not a European one, which clearly is a topic to address, not just to make sure that we are on a level playing field in case of resolution, now very much focusing on our topic, but also to say, looking at some legacy issues, effective, efficient insolvency and judicial procedures can do a lot to enhance the value of the one or the other non-performing loan. I'll leave it there. We are in current discussion, so just to mention, on a moratorium tool. Some member states have it, some don't have it, and clearly, as a resolution authority, our focus is very much on a resolution tool, on a moratorium tool to bridge between failing or likely to fail and resolution. So possibly, in a sloppy words, to get you into the resolution weekend without the patient dying under your hands. So with that, we are clearly in favor of a moratorium tool. There's discussion going on. And the one point is clearly important. It has to have a wide scope. If you have a narrow moratorium tool, it won't do the trick. Last but not least, we support, and I'm sure this is not uncontroversial here, we support the proposed requirement for non-EU GSIBs that when they meet certain conditions, they need to establish an intermediate EU parent undertaking. And there's a very practical reason for that, to make sure that they fall under one supervisor and one resolution authority, and not you end with a patchwork of them all being a bit too small, and then you need to orchestrate a lot. And this is, I think, then just to finish this part, we have to be clear when talking to the European Parliament and others. You once in a while hear, it's all too fast, and then the next one says, and since January 2016, it should all be in place. So probably navigating in the middle is not a bad place. But to be very clear, to reach resolvability, building up MREL, addressing all the obstacles, is a multi-year journey. And one of the key steps, not for each and every bank, but not to be omitted, because it's important for some banks in some member states to address, is legacy issues. We did not start from a beautiful blue sky on the first day. And here we clearly support the European Commission's and the ECB's efforts to address, in particular, the persisting problem of non-performing loans in the balance sheets of certain banks. And like I said, on the journey on resolvability, get started. Here I would say the sun is shining, even today it's a bit chilly. But when to start, if not now? To address it on a rainy day is by far more complicated. So with that, I would just add and echo a bit what go back to my start. International cooperation in resolution is essential. It's essential to make sure that for international banks we have an answer and an understanding. It's essential to avoid ring fencing and national exceptionalism. And with that, I think we have gone a long way. You could argue globalization is under criticism, all of that. But I've never in my career seen that there was more understanding and more cooperation between regulators, between now in our field resolution authorities than today. I think we all understand that the sum of the parts can only work if we cooperate. This holds true for resolution colleges, for crisis management groups, and we are engaging here to try to show, once in a while a bit complicated, that Europe is diverse, but that Europe is also speaking with one voice in these arguments. And to finish this, I think cooperation is also important when we look at the international framework. And here I really get the feeling we need to keep up our energy, not to come up with new ideas. The framework is basically set, but to make sure that we all truly implement it, faithfully implement it. And this is why we are also participating with our small team in the Financial Stability Board's work, in particular resolution steering group, their cross-border crisis management groups and the like. And I would like to take the opportunity to express really also in this audience my best wishes and readiness to cooperate with Mark Branson from FINMA, who took over the lead of the resolution steering group at the FSB. It's an important group. And let me close with a sentence which I think we always need to keep in mind. Since the outset of the financial crisis, whether you put it into 2007, like the Germans would do, or 2009, or in between, I think significant progress has been made. Banks are stronger, are better capitalized, better quality capital. But we must not lose momentum, but maintain these multilateral efforts in Europe and internationally. There remains more work to be done. Implementation, not inventing of even more. But we should also not lose sight on how far we have come. And with that, thank you for your patience.